Good afternoon, thanks for joining me on Kalkine TV. James Preston with you for the Economic Corner, where we bring you all the latest economic developments from across the globe. This week is loaded with key economic events, including the June US Consumer Price Index data release. Retail sales and industrial production information will also be released in addition to the release of extra data on top of that. In other words, there's a lot to get through. There are also meetings scheduled for the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, the Bank of Canada and the Bank of Japan. Let's get stuck into this action-packed week by beginning with the G20. G20 finance ministers have collectively endorsed carbon pricing for the very first time in order to try and tackle climate change. G20 finance ministers said that tackling climate change, biodiversity, and also promoting environmental protection remains urgent in their priority stakes. The group further added that the solutions could include the use of carbon pricing, mechanisms and also incentives. This is the first time that support for a carbon price in a communique has been expressed. In the United States, inflation data could provide a scare ahead of testimony by Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell on Wednesday and Thursday, where markets will be hypersensitive to any talk of early tapering. The earnings season also kicks off with JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup and Wells Fargo among those reporting. In Asia, China will release figures on economic growth, trade, retail sales and industrial output amid concerns they could underwhelm given the sudden easing in policy last week. According to Westpac, expectations around China's outlook have soured over the past month as a result of some disappointing data, which was intensified by the optics of coming off peak growth from the pandemic recovery. Moving on, it's not just the members of the G20 who have been discussing broad-based climate action. Speaking at the Venice International Conference on Climate, the day after the G20 talks, the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, emphasised the importance of a, quote, effective carbon price that reflects the true cost of carbon. A carbon price is a necessary precursor to the establishment of a carbon border tax, which would serve as a tariff on imports from countries without carbon pricing. William Nordhaus, an American economist and Nobel laureate, gave the keynote address at the conference calling for a, quote, climate club of countries who are willing to commit to a carbon price. He added that such an approach would help solve the problem of free riding, which has plagued existing global climate agreements, all of which are voluntary. From the climate to eccentric billionaires, and Elon Musk is expected to testify over the Tesla acquisition of SolarCity, which was worth $2.6 billion. SolarCity is Elon Musk's solar energy startup that was teetering just before Tesla bought it in 2016 for $2.6 billion worth of Tesla shares. Tesla shareholders have alleged that Musk engineered the buyout not to create an integrated clean energy powerhouse as he claimed, but to use the car maker's balance sheet to bail out one of his grandiose projects. Musk's economic and voting interest in the company was just 22%, but the suing shareholders alleged that the sheer force of Musk's persona allowed him to dominate the Tesla board. So if the court finds that Musk acted as a controlling shareholder, he might face a higher legal bar in proving that the deal was reasonable for all shareholders. All right, time now for a quick break on Kalkine TV, and on the other side of these messages, some updates from Australia's most prudent regulator.
Hi, this is Andy Liu broadcasting from Kalkine Media Studio in Australia, and I'll be hosting the new Kalkine Wellness Show. The half-hour show will cover topics from how wellness as a concept has become even more significant during COVID, to how becoming vegan may improve your health and much more. We are excited to showcase our live streaming show to our audience of millions overseas and in Australia. Tune in to Kalkine TV and join me.
Welcome back. Thanks for sticking with us on Kalkine TV. I'm James Preston and you're watching the Economic Corner. Let's now look at concerns Australia's chief regulating body has been indicating in relation to the banking sector. Australia's Prudential Regulation Authority, or APRA, has told banks that they must have a plan to deal with the possibility of zero or negative interest rates by April 2022. The regulator alarmed the banks after a consultation showed such rates could pose operational challenges in some instances. While the Reserve Bank of Australia has repeatedly said that a negative cash rate in the country is highly unlikely, APRA said it is possible that other interest rates determined in the financial markets could fall to zero or below zero at any time. APRA is thus asking banks to take reasonable steps to prepare for such a scenario and develop tactical solutions to implement zero and negative market interest rates and cash rates by the 30th of April 2022. An APRA banking official said that the tactical solutions are typically shorter-term fixes involving workarounds on the periphery of existing systems, along with overrides in downstream systems. APRA considers the risk arising from a bank's lack of preparedness for zero and negative interest rates to be material, since this could have significant implications for risk management, hedging, operational processes, contracts, product disclosures, IT and accounting systems, amongst other areas. Some banks said that they were well placed to deal with zero and negative market rates on financial products, typically handled by their treasury systems. Others said such rates on their retail lending or deposit products would pose operational challenges. Notably, Australia's cash rate has remained at a record low of 0.10% since November 2020. Yields on short-term government notes turned negative for the first time ever last month. APRA's consultation period began in December and will continue until August 20 before the regulator finalises its expectations by October 31. Moving on to some important economic data announcements, Japanese wholesale prices continued to surge in June as import costs spiked at the fastest pace on record. According to the latest data released by the Bank of Japan, the numbers were a clear sign of rising raw material costs that were weighing on corporate profits. Households may also start to feel the pinch as recent increases in oil costs are likely to push up consumer inflation in the coming months. Though the rebound is expected to be more modest in Japan than in other advanced nations due to weak demand. The Corporate Goods Price Index, or the CGPI, which measures the price companies charge each other for their goods and services, rose 5% in June from a year earlier. Time now for a short break on Kalkine TV. I'll be back with you in just a moment with more important economic data and some updates from the pandemic recovery front.
Crypto talk by Kalkine. The crypto market has been red hot given the Bitcoin rally since the past year. And now the most famous cryptocurrency has got competitors, Dogecoin and Ethereum. If the crypto market excites you, tune in with me, Sage, to know the latest developments about the existing digital currencies and the new ones that are joining the race. I'll help you understand the opportunities and the risks the crypto market has in store for you. For all the digital currency related developments, continue watching Crypto Talk by Kalkine.
Thanks for tuning in to Kalkine TV. James Preston with you for the Economic Corner, where we update you on all the biggest global economic announcements. Moving on to some important updates coming from Canada, and Ottawa has announced that its Pay Equity Act will come into effect on August 31, which is about 3 years after the legislation was first unveiled. Andrea Gunraj, Vice President of Public Engagement at the Canadian Women's Foundation, believes that it's a good starting point, but further discussion and regulation is needed to make sure more people benefit from the regulations. Gender equality advocates and Labor experts say that with the legislation going into effect later this summer, there are expectations of a reduction in the pay gap between women and men in some Canadian workplaces, though it remains unclear whether those gains will ripple out across the larger economy. And lastly, moving on to the state of the pandemic across the globe, finance ministers of the world's 20th largest economies warned that an upsurge in new coronavirus variants and poor access to vaccines in developing countries is threatening the global economic recovery. The G20 gathering in Venice was the ministers' first face-to-face meeting since the start of the pandemic. The global economic outlook had improved since G20 talks in April with the rollout of vaccines and economic support packages. But the communique acknowledged that its fragility in the face of variants like the fast-spreading Delta, and the G20 nations promised to use all policy tools to try and combat COVID-19. The Communique, while stressing support for equitable global sharing of vaccines, did not propose concrete measures in the meet. Though a mere acknowledgement for a recommendation for $50 billion in new vaccine financing by the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, World Health Organization and World Trade Organization was made by the board. All right, that's all for this edition of the Economic Corner. Hope you enjoyed the program and gained some insight into the current state of economic affairs. Please stay tuned for our final live show of the day, Last Trades with Sage. I'm James Preston, signing off.